Today's episode of The Bluff is sponsored by SitRep. SitRep is a notorious open source intelligent app that provides the latest updates for over 180 countries and over 500 topics, allowing you to stay ahead and informed. Now available on Apple and Google. Thank you, SitRep, for sponsoring this episode.
Welcome back to the Bottom Line Up Front, an Artorias podcast. I'm Matt.
And I'm Stefano, the Chief Intelligence Officer of Artorias. And today we're joined by a guest who's already joined us before, a subject matter expert on anything related to the Sahel, Casus Bellii. Casus, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, guys. Thank you for inviting me again on your beautiful podcast.
No, man, thank you so much for joining us again. And I think just as the guest and the people who see on the title, this episode is going to be a continuation of kind of the episode Matt and I did last Sunday, where we talked about the situation in Mali. Obviously, there's a lot of things going around the world with the Straits of Hormuz and Iran. Russia, Ukraine is continuing with Ukraine continuing to increase strikes on Russian oil infrastructure. But Mali is the new story that really has dominated a lot of the kind of the geopolitical talking points within the last week. And Cassius, I think you would be the perfect guest with Matthew as well to kind of give us update analysis and everything that's happened since the previous episode. We really covered it from just like the first 24 hours. So Cassius, I guess my first question to you to really start from when this everything happened on Saturday, what are the key updates that you've seen in Mali? Where's JNM? Where are the Tuaregs? Where's Mali? Where's the Africa Corps with the Russians? Broadly speaking, what are the key news items that maybe our listeners who've not been so focused on Mali might have missed?
So, the main things I have seen since last Saturday, there was actually on different level a lot of evolution from the political perspective, from military perspective, and so on. But let's start with political perspective. When the attack happened, one of the key, the most important thing to notice is how silent was the military leader in Mali, and how quiet everyone was actually in Mali. Like, it happened for a few days, but even the Russians didn't really talk about anything. It was kind of, they were like very surprised, and on the Malian side, it felt like it was a really huge mess. Because for the record, the Malian defense minister died. It was confirmed. At least one of the leader of the main Malian intelligence agency was injured, and there was a lot of arrest in Mali, a lot of inside problems that are not publicly shared, but I can hear from different sources. So basically, on the political level, there was a lot of instability, and also Assimi Goïta, which is the main leader of the military government in Mali, was pretty much quiet for a long time. Like, if I'm correct, he went publicly back on the national television on like the fourth day after the attack. So basically on 29 April, if I'm correct. So it took him a long of time to show up again and just confirms that he is still in control, and he is still like in place in the power. So you can imagine how long it took him to go back on the public space, which gives you a hint on how problematic was this attack. Because I remember the main attack that started on 25 April. It all started in Bamako with a vehicle that was thrown on the Malian defense residency, and then blowed up, and it destroyed pretty much the whole area. It was a truck, from my information, and they also tried to attack Asmi's Goita location. He was evacuated, and he was safe, and he stayed hiding on a former special forces base for a few days, and then he proceeded to show up again. But in the meantime, there was a lot of purge inside the government, with lots of people being arrested, a lot of militaries being arrested, and of course political voices, like civilian voices, uh, kept shut for a few days. So this is from the political side. And now, if we go more into the military perspective, what we have seen is a massive coordinated attacks on different fronts at the same time. One of the key things to keep in mind is that the Liberation Front of Azawad, which is basically the rebels Tuareg, has pretty much signed a deal with Al Qaeda, which is actually JNIM, and they agreed to work together, at least on the tactical level, to make progress on the ground and just capture different cities. And what was kind of surprising is to see Russians actually giving up on different positions to retreat and agree to go back to another position, and maybe probably build up and wait for more orders, actually, because I think they were not prepared for that. Remember that back in 2023, if I'm correct, when Wagner, which was back then it was Wagner, and now it's officially Africa Corp, and the difference is very important because Wagner was used as a tool to do for Russia to do plausible deniability, but now it's Africa Corp, which means every action they take on the ground can be accounted for the Ministry of Defense. So basically, Africa Corp just retreated from different positions, even giving up on a lot of their ammo and vehicles and so on different bases. And they waited for a few days to try to push back again. So this is the main front, and then we have seen also the Islamic State trying to attack various positions, but they were pretty much out of the game for few days, 4 or 5 days, and then they started to take advantage of the situation around Menaka, so very near the borders with Niger and Burkina Faso, which is pretty much the most dangerous area for everyone who has been on the ground. Everyone knows that. Islamic State is pretty much playing on this part of the country. So they try to attack a lot of positions, but they, so far from my understanding, they have been repelled by Malians and Russians. And then I think from the moment, like one day or like 20 or 3 hours before Assimi Goita came back to on the public national television, Russian has started a wild information campaign on their public channel, on their non-official channels with their influencer and so on, even on internet and social medias, coordinated with the Malian government to show that they are not inactive, despite what we have seen them doing, which was pretty much retreating from different positions. So they posted a lot of drone videos, combat footage, and so on to flood the information space, and just justifies their presence, because for the 3 or 4 days there were lots of questions about what the fuck are these guys doing. Like, we kicked the French troops, we wanted sovereignty, now we have Russians, and Russians does nothing. And on top of that, they deal with the JNIM or the rebels Tuareg to leave their position safely and abandon us Malians on our bases. So there was a lot of drama around this, even in Mali inside. And you can notice how the first action of Assimi Goita, even before seeing his people or talking on national television, talking to his country, the first action he has made was pretty much calling the Russian ambassador and calling Russian official, and tells them, like, they published a meeting footage and meeting pictures, but they privately ask them, okay, what the fuck are you guys doing? Because you cannot leave your position and abandon Malians on the ground. We're paying you a lot of money. What the fuck are you doing? So from various sources, this is pretty much what was asked by Assimi Goita, and yeah, the attacks kept in such situation for a few days. From the latest update I had, but I need to catch up a little. But from what I have seen, they pretty much lost another camp in Thessalite like 2 days ago, and they were attempt to do some counter offensive on the ground. And yeah, this is pretty much the overview I have. Then you have on another level like regional development. Burkina Faso and Niger have been pretty much quiet, despite they are in the islands. You know, this Sahelian states alliance they have built over the few years. They have been completely silent for days. Neighboring countries have been also kind of silent, but still keeping an eye on Mali. And Mali had a lot of problem with Algeria, remember, which is a huge problem for their alliance, and because Niger has pretty much good ties with Algeria, but Mali always had problems with Algeria, accusing them to found Tuaregs in general, including terrorists. There was Mali was also kind of beefing with Algeria to make it shorter, and yeah, this is pretty much the development we have seen. There were protests here in Paris from the Malian diaspora trying to support Mali government. So you can see kind of paradox, like we don't want France in our country, but we're fine with protesting in favor of Mali in France. So yeah, there's kind of paradox. And yeah, this is pretty much the huge overview. Probably I missed a lot of things actually, but there's so many information.
No, I mean,
But I
it's to
think
your
have,
point, Casus.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it's to your point. There's so much to kind of cover in the last week, and this is why I
yeah.
think you're a perfect guest. I would just add a couple of points that actually have kind of happened just before we recorded yesterday
Hmm.
evening U.S. Standard Time. Obviously, I know from your perspective, France. So
Hmm.
early morning hours in France. We did get a report from obviously the Agence Nigérienne de Presse, the Niger press claiming, kind of very interesting from your perspective, kind of the Niger's statement. One of the things they said is Niger president claims basically a Western plot to dismember the Sahel Strait. The Niger president alleges a Western plot to balkanize Mali and install emirs in Niger and Burkina Faso, leaking the claims to recent terrorist attacks in Mali and the offenses there in Mali. Clearly this is the when everybody, it's always the West fault, always the United States fault, it's always France specifically, as you said there, fault. And I think that's one of the things. I think there's a lot to kind of unpack. Matthew, I'll go to you quickly for this question for you and Cassis. And by all means, Matthew, if you have any questions to Cassis, by all means, go for it. The specific one I'm really interested in, if we can expand on, is the Russia component, right? The Africa Corps, the successor of Wagner, right? We saw reports, as Cass has mentioned, that they're entering into deals with JNM and the Tuareg rebels, the FLA, and they're abandoning the positions. But kind of on social media and their Telegram channels, we are seeing the Russians release video footage of their drone strikes, helicopter strikes, using their Air Force to conduct strikes against both JNM and the FLA. So Matthew and Cactus as well, we can make obviously for both. I guess my specific question related to the Russian is, are we seeing the AFRICOR really legitimately doing strikes against this kind of alliance of JNM and FLA? And if they are, is it having any impact? Or is this just kind of information warfare, propaganda, kind of like the pro-Russian Chechens, the TikTok brigades, as we would call them? Where do you see this going on, Matthew? And Cass, the same questions for you.
I mean, so it's not surprising at all that we are seeing this rhetoric shift towards external blame. I'm surprised that we didn't see it sooner. That is part of both the junta's narrative and the Russian narrative. It's that, Russia is succeeding where the West could not, which ignores the fact that the situation on the ground has become much worse. And that, this scale of coordinated attack is made possible in part because the Russians do not have the ability to prevent that type of coordinated attack. They don't have the access to the intelligence. I think there are limited strikes that the Russians are attempting to conduct. I mean, they are limited in terms of their resources to conduct those. So I think you are somewhat accurate where this is sort of you know staging for the propaganda purposes because we've seen that they haven't been super effective. They are effective at coordinating offensives, somewhat effective at protecting nodes, but we're not seeing any real shift. If anything, I think they're sort of on the back foot and hoping to consolidate. So I would keep an eye out to see um, how is Russia going to handle this? Are we going to see additional troops sent? Are we going to see more equipment being sent? That's what I would be looking at. But I think it's part of sort of this. They're trying to uphold this illusion of security and their ability to achieve what the West couldn't in the Sahel.
Ask the same question to you, please.
So I will start with saying something that lots of people tend to forget, but Mali, like the northern part of Mali, is pretty much as big as the whole Eastern Europe. Okay, so basically this area is so fucking big and it's so fucking messy uh, that you cannot handle positions, you cannot control it and make it safe with only 2 or 3 thousand troops, which is pretty much what Africa Corp have on the field. Considering a lot of them are in Bamako because they ensure the safety of Assimi Goita. They protect different checkpoints and bases, so there is way less than that in different positions in the north. So you have to see them as a support force to the Malians. So most of the Malians are deployed in the north, um, and this is how you have to see it and understand the logic. Now, going back to your question, um, there's lots of things to say. First, in 2025, sorry, um, Russia has sent like five from memory. Yeah, it was like 5 delivery of military equipment aimed at Africa Corp alone. So they sent it through ships that went to Guinea Conakry, and from Guinea Conakry, it was all going down to Mali and deployed for Africa Corp usage. And when we spent, I mean, I spent a lot of time looking at what was being sent there. You could see MRAPs, you could see BTR, you could see electronic warfare, you can see lots of equipments being sent there, even drones. Actually, they have a few drones. They have this drone Zala Kub. They deployed. They use already in Ukraine. They deployed Orion drone, at least one Orion drone, and they deployed various smaller drones actually. But keep in mind that drones isn't like the best technology Russia has. The best technology Russia has in this conflict is pretty much electronic warfare, which is very strong against drones, and probably MRAPs and some beta, which can be useful. But they deployed a lot of equipment to this country for Africa Corp, and they try to reinforce different position over the last year, especially in Gao, especially in Kidal, especially in different cities in the north. So they are effective in a way that they have capabilities to deploy drones, they have capabilities to secure an area, but they don't have enough troops on the ground to secure such a huge area alone. So they gotta rely at some point on Malian army, and Malian army isn't as well equipped, as well trained as Russian could be. I mean, even France back then, when we were deployed in Mali, we had like 10,000 troops or something in Mali, and we the main issue, like we lost like 58 troops in Mali during the whole Barkhane period, and during this whole time, one of the main problem was always the north, and it was a huge deal because there's only few axis, very little control over the area. So there's lots of problem with the border with other countries. And again, if we go back to 2023, everyone might remember what happened in Tinzahuatan when Wagner was pretty much smashed down by both Jnim and Azawad troops. So northern part of Mali was always a big deal. Now the thing is, um, I think Russians could not afford to lose too many people for Mali, uh, given that they had a lot of struggle to recruit specialists and like drone specialists, pilots for both helicopter and vehicles and so on, because the war in Ukraine is just consuming a lot of their own specialists. So if you want to find people to send Mali, you will have to pretty much recruit new people that you will have to train and so on. So to make it short, yes, they are sending drone and they are deploying troops and so on to fight against rebels and Jnim, and they are actually making some gain, like in a way they can repel some attacks or they can keep control on their own positions, but they are also using all this image to make their own propaganda. Obviously they do the both, but yeah, this is pretty much what I can say.
And I think just to build off of Cass's first point there about the size of Mali and why that is so important, you have to keep in mind that when you're talking about what assets the Russians have at their disposal, they have, maybe like 4 or 5 at most Su-25s in terms of attack helicopters, maybe 8, and like that's just not enough to like really project power within the country. So that's definitely a limiting factor for the Russians there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I will add that they lost one of their helicopter on the first day of the attack. I know from various sources it was like I mean, Russia, Africa Corp confirmed it. So I knew from various sources that this helicopter, which was MI8, if I'm correct, from memory, but maybe I'm wrong on this. But it was an helicopter driven by Russians, and it was usually used as what we call nurse, because it was like seen multiple times flying over to one point and just dragging all the injured people and taking them back to their base. And I know they tried to send this helicopter to take their own injured people, but it was just targeted by a manpad and it was destroyed. So they lost like probably 4, 5, 6 guys in this move alone. So basically, Russians are not used yet to what is it to evolve in such area. They are not announced on the field. I mean, as a number of troops, and at the same time, they don't want to lose their own position. So this is why they agreed with Jnim and Azawad. They made deals to retreat and just regroup their forces and try to build up their new positions and just see what they will do actually with the Malians, because it wasn't clear from the beginning, I believe. And they unfortunately, I mean, they left also lots of equipment behind them, which was taken by Jnim and other armed groups in the region. I remember seeing a video of S8 missiles, which is basically what they use for their helicopter, but you can use them for with various equipment. And yeah, basically, what I can say is Russians are not prepared for this. They don't have enough troops. I don't think their goal was to simply deploy like Barkan in the Barkan times and be present in the wall areas and make everything safer. I think they intended to provide some support on the ground to the Malian forces. But again, they don't have enough equipment, they don't have enough helicopter or drones to secure the whole area. There is 1,000 kilometers between Gao and Timbuktu, so you can imagine how big is this whole region. In the meantime, the guys in front of them are moving fast and quickly with Toyotas and motorcycles in the desert. They know perfectly the area. They can retreat. They can hide in the desert. They can take their time, and the main issue with this guy, I mean, the Jnim and the Azawad troops, their main problem is they don't have enough um, human power to just move like an army and just take city by city. So what they do is basically attacking by surprise and trying to rush as fast as possible and encircle the city until the guys will surrender, which is pretty much what we have seen from different videos of Malians surrendering their positions or forcing Russians to deal with them, to retreat and move back. Actually, the Azawad group made a statement on the like 48 first hours from memory. They asked Russians to just retreat and move out of their position as they will not be targeted or injured or whatever. They asked yesterday or 2 days ago the same on about Turkish troops, which maybe we will talk about it later. But yeah, you can see that they don't have the manpower to fight this units with lots of BTR and helicopter and so on, but they can take them by surprise and control these cities.
Actually, so let me expand on that because I think people are mixing and conflating both JNAM, which is the Al Qaeda affiliate in the Sahel, and then kind of ISIS in the greater Sahel, right? And I think people are saying, oh, well, here's the next caliphate, right? And that's kind of a term. And I think that's people mixing up kind of the ISIS model with JNAM. So, Cass, this is something I kind of asked Matt in the previous episode. I mean, with JNAMs and how they've been operating, what is their end goal here? And should viewers and listeners be aware that there's a kind of a difference, at least in their mindset, that how JNAM might want to operate in Mali is not necessarily ISIS in the greater Sahel and this kind of this establishment of a caliphate?
So I'm not anti-terrorist expert because my main topic is Russians in Africa, basically. But what I can say is Jnim, which is affiliated with Al Qaeda and the Islamic State, have different views on various topics, including the religion and how they should be rolling out their controlling area. They are not evolving exactly on the same areas anyway. And from this conflict, I mean, these attacks in Mali, we have seen them. They were not playing together. They actually, Islamic State pretty much waited for days without moving anything before attacking Menaka. While Janim, Al Qaeda was pretty much a partner with the Azawad Front to take control of different areas. So they will never team up because they have too much differences in their views on how armed group should rule these cities or areas. They even sometimes they have some of their units crossing path in the desert and they start shooting at each other. You can see such events as well in Nigeria and those other places in Africa. What happens most of the time is they just see each other, they start fighting between Islamic State and Al Qaeda. So yeah, pretty much they, as far as I know and from my understanding on these groups, which is not my specialty, they will not team up. So probably talking about a new caliphate is way too exaggerated in my opinion. There is a risk that the Jnim with the Azawad front team up and start to strangle Bamako because this is something we did not discussed yet, but Jnim pretty much agreed on a blocus on Bamako axis. So they are trying their best to block every single truck carrying oil, food, and whatever they are carrying to Bamako to force the local government to give them what they want, whether it is an independence or areas they can control and play with, and so on. So I think there's a bigger risk to see Azawad and Jnim getting what they want, which is pretty much a partition of Mali, but sort of balkanization in the north. But keep in mind, there's a lot of ethnic issues in the north too. This is not just full Tuareg areas. You have a lot of different ethnicities in the north. So there will always be sort of tensions out there, and the only way to keep this area ruled will be to have a strong centralized power in the north, which is pretty much not the case. And on top of that, remember that Tuareg, especially, um, they they are first of all they are tribes in the desert. So the logic for such people is to make your tribe survive. So just like I think in Afghanistan, you can have people switching side quickly, and you can have a lot of connection, indirect connection, because oh yeah, your brother, he's married to this woman, and this woman is the daughter on wine leader in Jenim, and so on. And this is such connection you can see between different tribes inside the Tuareg dynamic, and this is how Azawad can be connected to Jnim. Now, saying that, it doesn't mean the Azawad is supporting all the ideology of the Jnim. They also have people that pretty much hate by all their hurt Jnim. And if you notice, one of the proof of that is if you look at all the footage from Al Qaeda and Azawad that have been published, you will notice that you can see a lot of kamikaze drones, like FPV drones used by Azawad. They pretty much masterized these techniques of using drones as kamikaze with explosives and targeting positions. While I have not seen a lot of footage on Al Qaeda side, pretty much they use it just to monitor the battlefield, but nothing much. So this fact alone lets you give you a hint that they don't share everything between them. There's always they are still distant, like they're allies, temporarily allies now, because they see the opportunity to take different cities and possession. But I think Azawad group pretty much know that Al Qaeda can still be an enemy in the future, so they won't share everything they know with them. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
No, I mean, and I think that's the key aspect, and kind of highlights the complexity of this with the various actors and the different motivating factors that each group has. But if I could take it kind of a step back and kind of maybe do some analysis from the last week, Matthew, from a military perspective, I guess the question is, now that we've had almost actually over a week since the offensive started, I guess the question I have, Matthew, is how would you rate the JNM Tuareg offensive? Was it an effective military strategy? Obviously, those operations are continuing. It has not ended. But have you seen them operate effectively? Did you see areas of cross communication and maybe ability to operate concurrently, or was this more like each side had their own territorial area where they focused and one side didn't mess with the other? And overall, how would you rate the effective military strategy and effectiveness that we saw in the last week from the Tuareg and JNEM's perspective?
I think it's been effective in achieving their aims. I think it would be difficult to argue against that, even if we see, some of the gains made by the FLA. If we see them pushed out of Kidal, I think they have sort of divided the attention, even more so, of the junta. I think that the ability for JNIM to continue to put that pressure on the junta, and really break into the sort of psychological bubble that Bamako had previously existed. And we had seen that sort of weakening even prior to this with the pressure that they had been putting on the roads and the supplies and in and out of the city and the disruption. Um, and it's also a blow to Russia. And one of JNIM's major goals here is, just as one of their goals was to get the French to leave Mali, and we saw that happen mostly because of the coup that we saw. But the coup happened, at least ostensibly, because of the security situation. And the junta was saying that they would be able to bring more security to the country. The French left, the Russians came in, and JNIM is trying to do sort of the same thing where they create this instability. They create even more pressure than they were able to put on Bamako when the French were there. Um, and that pressure is real on the junta, and the junta's messaging will continue to be, everything has been taken care of, the situation has been resolved. That is not the case on the ground. What we are seeing is JNIM still has the ability to assert a level of, if not direct control over the roads, threaten the security of the roads, threaten the security of the junta's troops. Um, Kidal, we haven't seen FLA sort of implement any sort of like actual administrative changes, but they're still there. The region will continue to be contested, but I think this is a huge blow to the junta, and I think the coordination between the two, the fact that they were able to time this, and they don't make quite as strange bedfellows as people might think. Keeping in mind that a lot of the members of JNIM are also Tuareg. So yeah, I think you could say that this has been successful. And one of the things that I would just point out, based on the what Casus was saying, it is really important to separate out ISIS, which a lot of people, you'll hear different names for it. ISIS in the Greater Sahel, ISIS in the um, Sahel provinces. Uh, but they worked together with JNIM for a brief period that was known as sort of the Sahel exception. But now we're seeing more contested areas between the two. And I think he made a really good point there, and understanding that the aims are sort of different. So when Stefano, you mentioned something like the caliphate, that is something that ISIS would be looking to establish, whereas JNIM is looking to get the Russians out, get foreign influence out, and exert more control over whoever the government is in Bamako, and get Islamic law implemented broadly in the region.
So let's focus a little bit. I know kind of you guys, a lot of the focus you do is on the Russian component, right? But I think for our listeners, it'd be great to ask this question. So, Cassius, I'll go to you for this question. I mean, if JNAM is able to establish themselves much more so in Mali, they remove the Russians. The Mali junta is unable to challenge JNAM's kind of territorial control and kind of administrative control. Can we start seeing JNM use the territory they have in Mali and West Africa as a base of operation to plan external operations and terrorist attacks around the world, similar to what Al Qaeda did in the 90s with Afghanistan? Can we see that kind of repeat itself with JNM specifically, and then redouble and focus more on external operations against the United States, the West, and more than likely Europe specifically? So, Castus, that question for you, and then Matt.
Actually, this is a very good question. In this scenario, which I honestly don't see happen because Russia has committed too much in this region to leave this fast. Like, if they leave, it will take them years. But let's say this scenario happened, Russia leaves, Malians stay only with themselves facing Al Qaeda. Yeah, the main risk will be to have them settling in different key cities in the north, maybe even pressuring Bamako. But being able to settle in different cities and regroup and build forces, get more organized, this will threaten, at first, the region, of course. I think of Algeria, which has a lots of issues with terrorist groups. Remember when the Pope was in Alger a few weeks ago, an explosion occurred out there, and from my own sources, it was someone trying to blow himself up near the Pope. So Mauritania also will be threatened because it took them years to absorb kind of these groups and pacify them by giving them some rights and so on. And then you will have Burkina Faso and Niger too facing this problem, adding up to the Islamic State issue, which they already have. So yeah, definitely you will have sort of let's say uh, a huge position they can hold, they can control, they can administrate for a few years, and maybe create a major threat in the future for the whole region in Africa, and then of course other parts in the world, including Europe, especially. But again, I don't see this scenario happening because, despite what we see, despite what everyone says on the ground and so on, the Al Qaeda isn't, even with Azawad, with FLA, they are not enough organized to build up serious political and security forces that could rule and start to expand. It's still chaotic somehow, even inside their groups. Um, they still have different problems inside, and they are not very organized. What we see now is that they are somehow just taking their opponent, Russians and Malians, by surprise, and this is how they progress. They basically send their VBIED in Bamako. They kill and explode the residency of Malian defense minister. They create a psychological shock among Malian troops. They force them to surrender, and by surrounding them quickly with their jeeps and with their Toyotas and motorcycle. This is how they act basically, but they don't have any serious forces or any strong leader for now that will be able to have the support of everyone. On top of that, even with their alliance with FLA, remember that this is probably temporary and they were already fighting in the past. We might see them fighting again when this mess will calm down. So nothing is acquired now, and they don't have enough space to grow or settle or get bigger or get a serious regional, international threat, let's say. Um, so yeah.
Matt, I'll ask you the same question. I mean, can JNM start doing external ops from the territories they control there and the possibility of even controlling more territory inside of Mali?
So I agree with Casus that at the moment that's unlikely. My larger concern is that we are starting to see sort of like the incremental aspects or conditions that would be necessary uh, appearing or emerging. So if we saw um, the stability to continue to decrease, and we saw, say, the current Goita junta fall or some sort of transition away from the Russians. And we saw Janum gain more influence over whatever it was to follow. That is when I would start to become more worried. What I think is a good way of sort of looking at this, keeping in mind that, while they are Al Qaeda affiliated, they have their own objectives, and that's always important to point out. But in this case, what I would do is point to sort of the way Al Qaeda looked at their conflict in, say, like the 80s or early 90s, where their focus was sort of like on the near enemies. And what we are seeing is groups, jihadist groups, sort of having the spillover effect into countries like Benin or Nigeria. And we obviously see a lot of conflict in the tri-border region with Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. And so, as all of that is happening, I think the immediate threat is to our being the United States, France, our important allies in the region, such as Benin and Nigeria. But we are starting to see sort of like, and should see if this continues, but like expanding safe space for them to operate in. And another thing to look at is sort of the expansion of their logistical networks and their revenue generating activities like taxation and tolls. Um, and that has been increasing uh, recently. And that is just building an environment where those safe haven dynamics become a little bit more important to watch and something that we should be tracking, not as an imminent threat, but to make sure that we don't allow that type of environment to manifest itself. And so we should be seeing if they are trying to build those external networks, which as the illicit trade across the Sahel um, continues, if they gain access to something like the Gulf of Guinea, that threat becomes much more real. So the goal should be preventing this trend from continuing, and that's why people, I think, in the United States should really be concerned about this, and not necessarily thinking about like 5 years out or maybe even 10 years out. But if we ignore the situation, then we sort of lose any input over what is happening in that region.
Actually, so Matthew, let me ask you a follow-on question because that's going to then tie into a question that I have for Casa. So my question for you, Matthew, is from your perspective right now, after a week of fighting, is it who has the initiative? Is it JNM and the Tuaregs? Is it Mali and the Russians? So who currently has the initiative? And if it's JNM and the Tuaregs, is there anything you can see either Mali or the Russians doing to maybe stop this initiative?
So I would say that as of right now, JNIM and FLA have the momentum. Um, in terms of what the junta can do right now, it really seems that they're focused on the framing and the rhetoric around it. I think the things that allowed this to happen in the first place, those factors are going to prove to be something that stands in the way of them effectively countering specifically JNIM. I think FLA is uh, potentially a little bit easier for them to achieve objectives against because it could include something like taking back Kidal and having like an offensive operation to do that. But when it comes to sort of the architecture of JNIM and their goals, I think it's going to be somewhat difficult for them to roll that back because we already saw JNM trying to um, frustrate the junta when it comes to like attacking the supply lines into or out of Bamako. Um, so no, I think it's going to be difficult for Russia with the assets that they have and you know as Casus was saying, the fact that this really at scale needs to be something conducted by the Malayan troops themselves and the junta. I think it's going to be difficult for them to secure Mali. They haven't been able to do it so far. It's been getting worse. And I think right now the momentum is with JNM, but I'd love to hear Casus' take.
Yeah, no, and Costas, my question to you is obviously by all means expand on that. But kind of I have two follow-on questions, but I want to ask you the first one. If JNAM and the Tuaregs have the initiative, and I suspect you concur with Matt's analysis, I mean, is there a scenario, because we're getting reports that the capital of Mali, Bamako, might even have kind of the initial indications of some sort of like a blockade, something that's kind of already happened and just worsening because of this offensive. Is there a situation where we run into that either the capital falls to either the rebels or JNAM, or just kind of breaks down and just lawlessness and chaos takes reins because the military junta just lose any semblance of governance? And then I have a follow-on question for you after that.
So I agree pretty much with what Matthew said actually. Regarding your question on Bamako, my so I got asked by different people the same question on whether FLA or JNIM will take over Bamako, but I don't see it happening because Bamako is quite big. I think like from what we have seen over the last hour, the last few days, uh, the local government, the military government, have deployed a lot of its forces in the capital. They have introduced a curfew. They are adding more and more security in the capital. They really don't want to see any more breaches in their security circle in the capital, especially on the airport. Remember that the airport is the main entry on the country. We don't have any access to the sea, so airport is very important. So I don't think Al Qaeda or FLA is big enough to take over the country, to take over, sorry, the capital, enter inside, and just fully start running out their own government. I don't see it happening for many reasons. This is a urban territory which is quite big. This will be very difficult to take. It's as I remember that Russians tried with all their troops to take Kiev back then in Ukraine, and they failed because this is very difficult when you're in an attacker position to take a huge city, and it's even more capital because everyone will be armed. You're the attacker, so you will suffer most of losses anyway. Yeah, I don't see it happening at all. Now, and I think even FLA and Azawad and Al Qaeda pretty much agree on this, even themselves, because in their statement they agree that they will start to block us. They are not even pretending to take over the capital. They are just blocking the main roads that leads to the capital to try to force the government to either surrender or give them some advantages or sign a deal with them. So this is pretty much what I see. But to extend a little bit your question, I think it's more likely to see some angry Malian officer from the special forces or the presidential guard, which are traditionally in Africa, both of the forces that are the most trained and equipped in their countries. It's more likely to see an officer from these units try to make a coup and take the power by himself. I think now the chances are reduced in Mali because now Assimi Goita appeared on the national television and he gives a hint that he's trying at least to say to his people that it's okay, I'm back in power, everything is under control, you don't have to worry. So this is the message he's trying to send to the population overall, but especially to the political and military side. And among the officers, I know there were a lot of frustration because he was hiding for days, and a lot of contestation started to happen among the troops. Because if your leader, which is himself coming from a coup d'etat back in 2021, If he's hiding at the first attack and he's not able to show himself and make sure he's in power, then you might give ideas to other officers that maybe they are better at ruling the country. So this is a highly likely scenario in my mind, but this is my opinion, and yeah, I don't see it happening. I
It's interesting you say that, because that was actually one of the things I wanted to ask you about, is kind of this idea of a coup. But just to quickly just follow up, and then is there a possibility though, right? Because I did kind of wanted to ask you about the coup, and I'm glad you addressed it. But obviously, that's an indicator of just a breakdown in governance. Is there a situation, Casus, in your mind, where although JNAM and the Tuaregs don't want to seize the capital, but they have a blockade. Large areas of Mali, specifically in the north, have fallen. The government has no reach there. And the blockade and all these other factors and the Russians doesn't look like they're rushing to send more support over to Mali. They have bigger pressing concerns in Ukraine. Is there a situation, though, that you might actually run into, though, just a state collapse, not that different, let's say, than Afghanistan, or even Damascus, where the JNAM and the Tuaregs don't necessarily have to go into the capital, but all these pressing factors around the capital just causes the government to collapse, and now the road is open for these, or maybe even these groups don't get involved; they just let chaos reign. What is the likelihood of chaos reigning in the capital and a breakdown of governance?
um Okay, I will just go back to what I said at the beginning of the podcast when I was talking about the political situation, because I missed one key information, which is that inside the government, Malian government, like Malian military government, um, they are not completely aligned with Russia from the inside. Sadio Camara, which is the Minister of Defense in Mali, which died a few days ago, he was pretty much the voice of Moscow inside the government. And Assimi Goita, which is the military leader of of this country, he's pretty much open to Russians. So my point is being that there's dissensions inside the government on whether Mali should open the door more to Russians or Turkish, and which is an ally and who is not an ally, and so on. So this is the first thing I wanted to say. The second point is to answer your question in my mind, in my scenario, but it's bold to anticipate the future. You never know how it goes. Um, I think those groups are not big enough to take the capital. I think this is kind of different from what happened in Syria and Afghanistan anyway, because there's too many factors, too many different dynamics, which is ethnical dynamic, economical dynamic, and so on. There's so many different parameters in the region to compare it and just try to imagine that it will happen the same way that it happened in Syria or Afghanistan. But I think they are not big enough to take the capital. I think they wanna keep chaos and play a huge psychological warfare towards Malians, force them to surrender, maybe recruit some of them. I'd like to remember there's a there's at least 3 or 4 major officer and even one Malian general which has flew and abandoned his position and he's searched by the Malian authorities. So this psychological warfare is actually working. You have a lot of people defecting their position and just leaving and going out of the country, going to the neighboring countries. So I think this is what actually Al Qaeda and FLA wants. They want to play this pressure on the government. Maybe they want to see emerge someone else able to talk with them actually, because Azimi Goita seems very closed and not open on dealing with them. Remember that they were an agreement with the northern part of the country with Tuareg rebels, especially to include them in the government in Bamako back then when Barkhane was in place. And all of that agreements were thrown away by Assimi Goita. So he pretty much ended all the deal with the northern side. And now maybe they want to see someone else coming up to the power just to give them an offer on how we can live together, on what is your territory, what you can administrize, and so on in the country. Maybe even giving them a sort of autonomous region in Mali or something like that. So I think this is what they are actually aiming at. I think we will see them trying to put more pressure on different cities on the north. Remember, there's only a few cities captured by these groups. From memory, there is Tessalit, Kidal, Gelhok, and a few other areas. Maybe they will try to look toward Gao, they will look toward Timbuktu, and so on in the future. But for the capital, I think if they are good enough at cutting the main axis and forcing the government to do something actually about it, and they actually fail, I think it's high likely to see someone getting angry inside the military and throw away Assimi Goita and take power. Now we have said this. Remember, there is still Burkina Faso and Niger in this story. They might send their own troops or share more intelligence with Assimi Goita to keep him in place because the whole alliance started with him actually. So if he goes, you don't know what will happen in the future. And remember, they brought about these islands for years. Now they try to push narrative toward other African countries, saying like, you know what, maybe we should build our own alliance. And now everyone can see that this alliance don't do anything. If we talk about Russians, we have seen them retreating from their positions. From what I understand, but I need to check this later, there were deal like talks between the military government in Mali and Russian on whether they can or cannot send few more thousand of troops and equipment to Mali through planes. And I got the information yesterday that there were some rotations with some Russian cargo planes in Algeria. So maybe there's something going on there. Remember, there's a lot of transportation going through Libya as well, going to Syria, going to Russia, and then going to Mali in this path. Um, so now I cannot say exactly what will happen. I just think the strategy adopted by Al Qaeda and FLA what might be to just have someone changing the composition of the government in Bamako to open at least a dialogue with them and start dealing like a business and saying, okay, this north side we have the cities we have control now. We will give it to you. We will be able to nominate a local governor, which is one of our guy, and we will have a hand on the revenue. We will control this area, but we agree that maybe this region will be autonomous to Mali or something like this. So I don't know exactly what they can ask because I don't have all the insight at the moment, but this is pretty much how I see it.
So for my last question, Matt, I'm going to go to you first, and then I'll go to Casus. What is the appetite? And I think you guys are going to know the direction I'm going with, but I'll go, Matt, with you from the American perspective, and then Casus, I'll ask this from the French perspective. Matt, obviously the United States has a lot of priorities outside, either in the Western Hemisphere, against Iran, the Indo-Pacific. We see the U.S. Announce that they're pulling 5,000 troops out of Germany. What's the likelihood that the United States might do anything militarily to kind of stop JNM's and the Tuaregs' offensive, and more specifically, probably focus much more on JNM from a military component? Will there be a scenario where the Americans might decide they have to get involved because the last thing they need is an Al Qaeda territory in the Sahel? And then, Cassius, I'll ask you the same. a little bit differently, obviously from the French perspective. But Matt, I'll go to you first.
So I think there's very little appetite for getting directly involved in Mali. It would be especially difficult with the junta there. It's complicated by, the Turks having their training role there, and obviously with the Russian backstop. So I think what we will see is sort of a continuation or even expansion. We are seeing a little bit of an expansion of the strategy that they're currently utilizing, and that is to focus on supporting our allies in the region, shoring up Nigeria, Benin, working in terms of like training in Ghana, and look to continue intelligence gathering, monitoring the situation, and preventing spillover from what we've seen in sort of like the tri-border region and along the borders with Nigeria and Benin specifically, shoring up those borders and providing capabilities for those countries to sort of strengthen their borders and their military. We've seen Benin has been investing a lot more in terms of the infrastructure, in terms of training, building up some of their infrastructure along the border and the very important areas that would support those operations from within Benin. It's also important to keep in mind that when dealing with Nigeria, there's a split focus on that very border between spillover that is coming sort of from the western portion of the country, that northwest. The spillover that we're seeing is primarily from groups like JNIM or IS in the Greater Sahel or the um, Sahel province, but also in the northeast, they're dealing with spillover from the Lake Chad Basin area with ISWAP, so Islamic State in the Western African provinces. So I don't think that there is political appetite for it at the time, but I do think that on some level, because that this is not a dinner table conversation, it's not something that a lot of Americans are monitoring or aware of, that AFRICOM has the ability to sort of take some of these actions now. Well, this isn't really a focus. But in terms of actual military involvement, uh, no, I think there's a very low chance of that happening.
So, Cassius, to you, not only from a French but a European perspective, um, can we see any possibility of the French leading a European mission in Mali again to stop this? Is there just absolutely no political appetite whatsoever? And then understanding that even inside of Mali, that kind of it's a different geopolitical game, and this whole idea of French influence in Africa is kind of too toxic. And because seen the French really pull out of a lot of areas in Africa. So the other side of that question could France kind of mirror the United States and say, okay, well, we've lost the Sahel, but let's beef up the support on the countries around the Sahel in a way to try to at least have some containment and prevent JNIM's expansion, such as in Ghana or Benin or Togo, that we've kind of seen them do already.
Wow, this is such a complex question, actually. I don't pretend to speak on the behalf of the whole European Union or even the French government or anything, but from the French, I will only speak for the French perspective and maybe give my own view on the European perspective. Um, for the French view now, actually, I mean, even in the news in France, there's not a lot of media's interested in talking about what's going on there. And it's true that I had my own biases because I keep an eye on the region. And when I was talking with just random people in France and so on, and I say, okay, have you seen the mess in Mali? And they were not. Um, they were not aware at all of what was happening. So I realized I was in my own bubble because I work on the region. But most of the people don't even know what's happening anyway. They don't. I don't think they care anyway, especially because we love the country. We lost a lot of people out there. There is kind of this feeling of Malians being ingrates toward France and putting a military power in place. Especially in Paris now, we have seen Malian diaspora starting their own protest in the capital, and a lot of people say like, "Okay, you guys are taking profit from our democracy and freedom to start protests and support your country, but you don't want it to happen in your country. You're basically supporting a dictatorship in your country, and yet you are in France. So what your guys doing? Like, what the fuck is wrong with you?" So this is kind of the feeling now in France. There's not a lot of appetite, just like I think in the US, for anything intervention in Mali. I had a talk with different officers which have served in Barkhane, and the last things they want to do is going back there. It's like, okay, we don't want to hear about this anymore. This is not our problem. Malians wanted to be sovereign. Let it be sovereign and let it have their fun with Russian. Um, so this is the French perspective for now. Now that I said this, you cannot ignore the links between both countries for various reasons. We have a lot of diaspora. We have a lot of connection between two countries. Migration will remain a problem for North Africa, but also for Southern Europe, and France has this position where it's look at what's happening in the eastern side with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but at the same time, it also looks at the Mediterranean and look at what's happening and with Italy, with Spain, with all these southern Europe countries. They always keep an eye on what's happening in Africa anyway. Now if I go broader and talk about European perspective, which is only my opinion, of course, I think Europe is barely interested in that anyway. They have a lot of focus on what's going on in Ukraine. They are. It's difficult enough to uh, pilot Europe with 27 countries, which has so many different opinions and view, and coordinate anything when it's regarding Ukraine. So I don't think there's any much interest in Africa. I know there's, of course, the Europe always have this sort of service inside, which is keeping an eye on what's happening in Africa anyway, because you cannot just ignore what's happening there. But I don't think they will be okay with sending any troops out there. They have never done that anyway in the past. So even if they wanted to do it, I think it will be France to lead or propose this option. And at the moment, with election coming in France, remember Macron is in his last year now, and he will have election next year. And with all the economical problem in France, lots of debt, lots of money issue, and so on, I don't think this is the moment for France to start any expedition in Africa or try to help the local government, especially since we don't have a very good ties with them. The only difference with Europe is that Europe tried, because there's many different countries which have different opinions on what should be done with Mali, for example. The European Union is trying to open a dialogue with Mali, with Assimi Goita, and all these guys in Burkina Faso, Niger, and so on. But for now, I don't think there's much appetite for that. On the other hand, I can see that Russia is trying their best to stay in and keep as the privileged partner to Mali. I see that Turkey is also trying to push a lot in Mali, because from my own sources, I got the information that Asmi Goita was protected by some Turkish mercenaries in Bamako during the attacks on 25 April. So there is at least 30 mercenary. It's not clear whether they're Sadat or something else, but there's at least 30 Turkish guy making sure uh, Asmi Goita is safe in and stay in power for now. So there's also this dynamic, and this is kind of the opposite to what happened in Libya. Like, remember, Russia was supporting one side, Turkey was supporting the opposite side. They can kind of indirectly fought against each other, but in Mali they seem to be on the same line. So for now, to make it shorter, I don't think France will do anything. This is not in its interest anyway. I don't see Europe trying to do more than anything diplomatic. But for France, I think they will just study the possibility of just making sure that French citizens in Mali are safe, the embassy is safe. If needed, we can close it and just completely leave, and everyone goes out, and that's it. I don't think we will see anything more for the short time, but maybe I will be wrong. We will see how it goes. For now, I only have seen the diplomatic statement made by France condemning the attacks on Bamako. So it's not completely lost, but I think it's very difficult. Like the talks between the two countries is kind of difficult for now.
And just to add one last facet of that, if you are looking to see like who might have an appetite for intervention, I think, again, looking towards those sort of Gulf countries that I mentioned before, Benin and Nigeria, what we've seen them do in sort of the Lake Chad basin is create this multinational joint task force, or the JTF. And that is supported by the French in terms of like logistics and intelligence, but it wouldn't be something direct. So I would look at some sort of West African coalition that might have interest in doing that, but that would take some sort of triggering event before you saw something like that happen. And the French have kind of signaled that they're taking somewhat similar approach to what the United States has done in terms of trying to consolidate the security of the Gulf states, and that, by providing like assistance with like maritime policing, and then even in Benin, when there was an attempted coup, the French provided logistic support and intelligence to the government in Benin, but they also shared that with Nigeria, and Nigeria actually ended up sending in ground troops. This was in December of 2025 during an attempted coup in Benin, and Nigeria even conducted limited airstrikes during that and kept the government in place in Benin.
Yeah, I will just add one more thing. You're absolutely right. During the coup in Benin, actually, there were even special forces sent by France, special forces that were in Ivory Coast, and they have been sent to Benin to ensure the safety of the government, alongside with Nigeria and other countries like the United States that provided intelligence and so on. So there's this dynamic. I don't see France acting more than providing training troops in the neighboring countries that has a lot of issues with terrorism expanding. You mentioned it before, but for example, in Benin in the north, this is getting really messy actually. There's lots of pushes of different terrorist groups on the ground. There's lots of demoralization of the people in the north, and a lot of people starting to contest the local government because their life is getting worse because of this terrorist group. You have the same in Togo in the north, the same with Ghana. I'd like to remember that there were a terrorist group crossing the border in northern Ghana, threatening the country. The same with Ivory Coast. So basically, since the military juntas in the region took power, you kind of have this vacuum because France left, European left, America left from Niger, and so on. And this vacuum is being filled not by the local government troops, but by terrorists. So these terrorist groups are just expanding. And when we see what happened actually in Mali these last days, and Russian leaving behind them lots of military equipments, Malian surrendering, lots of money getting abandoned on the field in Mali. That's like six 600,000 euro have been abandoned in one city in Kidal, if I may remember. You see the vehicles, the BTR abandoned, the helicopter, and so on. And then all of this participate to reinforce these armed groups, because you have then people asking like, okay, but how do these terrorist groups are getting armed and financed? The money comes from local corruption, the zakat, and so on, like this forced taxes on the areas you control. But this is also coming from the position this local army loses. This is also from where they take their weapons, and there's a lot of armed trade in the desert. There's a lot of businessmen that just sell weapon here and there. I like to remember that this guy Victor Bout, which is a Russian arm dealer, which has been freed by the U.S. and sent back to Russia. This guy job was literally sending and selling weapon during the Cold War era in Africa. So you have lots of small Victor Boots in Africa from different nationalities selling weapons here and there. So it's really easy actually for these groups to get armed, and it's becoming a threat to other states, neighboring states, because the military juntas are not able to manage this problem. So it's basically spreading like a poison and threatening Nigeria, Benin, Togo, Ghana, Ivory Coast, Guinea, Senegal, and so on. And this is mostly because these countries in the Sahel cannot hold this threat anymore. And this is why you see Nigeria getting involved in Benin. This is why you see a lot of reinforcement at the border with the Senegalese, and the same with Ivory Coast and so on. So yeah, this was probably my last word, but it was kind of important to say.
Well, I want to thank you both, Cassius, Matthew. I mean, this was a phenomenal episode that went to the heart of not only just Mali, but the wider West Africa region as a whole. And I think it was a great episode that provided a lot more in-depth analysis, giving us a clear understanding of where we are now that we're in a week into this offensive. And obviously, the picture is a lot clearer than when we did this last week, and we were trying to give that kind of that immediate reaction of what was going on. So, Matthew, again, thank you for your talk and your analysis on this. Cass, is always great to have you. We'd love to have you back soon to kind of continue a lot of these conversations, not only about Mali, but Africa on a whole, and specifically the Russia component, as they're one of the main actors involved in this. And clearly they're having a very hard time trying to stabilize the situation. But with everybody, thank you so much for joining us on this another episode of The Bottom Line Up Front, and we will see you next week.